is another very, very serious threat that is increasing in severity. Tonight, I'm pleased to say we have three excellent speakers. We have Suzanne Jeffrey, who is the chair of the Campaign Against Climate Change Trade Union Group, and in fact, chair of the Campaign Against Climate Change itself, and she's a member of the NEU. We have Sam Mason, who is policy officer for the PCS, who has done a lot of work on climate change, and the PCS have some very good work on climate change. And we also have Anis Melsham-Ray, who is the secretary of Leeds Trade Union Council, who have very recently produced a document about how to retrofit houses with high quality insulation and heat pumps, and it's the sort of thing that we probably need to look at, and I'm sure many other trade councils need to look at as well. So we will start with Suzanne. Suzanne will speak first. She'll speak for about 10 minutes. So everyone else hopefully is muted, and if Suzanne is unmuted, she can start.
Great. Okay. Thanks. Thanks very much, Steve, and thanks for the invitation from Medway Trades Council to speak at tonight's incredibly timely meeting. I just wanted to start really by saying I think that the COVID crisis has revealed and reinforced in real time many of the issues which are central to the climate crisis. Both of those crises have their roots in an economic system which, because it has prioritized the profits of companies and individuals over the health of people and the planet, has ensured a turbocharged drive to the destruction of nature and of climate, and has produced the consequent crises of our current COVID crisis, with the destruction of land, change in land use for those kind of prioritizing of mass profits over the nature that sustains us, and indeed the climate crisis, which has a result of that huge profitable use of fossil fuels at a time when we absolutely need to stop the use of fossil fuels and the kind of infrastructure that surrounds it. And I think for both the climate crisis and for the COVID crisis, I think there's another clear assertion that we, I think in the labour and trade union movement, need to start fighting for, is that neither of those crises will be addressed or resolved by simply reproducing the system which caused the problem in the first place. There's signs of how things could change. There were brief signs of how things could change. There were brief signs of how rapidly we can make some of the changes that we need to make. But instead, as the public health crisis has escalated, we've seen a rush back to business as usual. In fact, a push back to business as usual. In fact, a bullying back to business as usual, and indeed into unsafe workplaces. And once again, we are seeing, as we would have predicted, an upsurge in the virus, which will lead to tens of thousands more unnecessary deaths, as indeed it did in the failure to act, to take the measures that were needed to prioritize public health, and to do so too slowly saw the huge number of unnecessary deaths. There is a program. There's been a program in place to talk about saving jobs and the economy. So we've got, the programs that were announced yesterday, or whenever it was, earlier this week, by Rishi Sunak, following on from the furlough scheme. But it feels that what's been prioritised is not really jobs, but what's been prioritised is a shape to the economy, and the maintaining of that type of economy, which over quite some period of time has failed to address the broader needs in society, has presided over increased inequality and injustice, and really has done absolutely nothing to tackle the climate crisis. And it feels to me that that's what's been prioritized rather than actually jobs and livelihoods. That economy, that low wage, 0 hours economy, as well as at this moment in time, trying to reduce government spending in some areas, but there still seems to be a huge willingness to hand over huge amounts of money to the private sector, who seem incapable of doing any of the jobs that they've been asked to do, whether it's test, track and trace, or whatever, provide PPE. Huge amounts of money being handed over to the public sector. I'm skeptical about the arguments in favour of saving jobs. The government that we have and the previous manifestations of Conservative governments have not been interested in saving jobs, through from the jobs massacre of the 1980s to the huge destruction of public sector jobs in the era of austerity, through to really what amounts to quite a pathetic response to the jobs massacre, to the absolutely tsunami, appropriate term, of jobs that we are about to see lose in the context of this in the context of this COVID crisis. So I think that we do have to really assert very loudly and think seriously about the strategizing and the campaigning that we do in the trade union movement to fight for jobs, to fight for livelihoods, but to fight for a huge transition in an economy which has been failing far too many people for far too long. And it's worrying that, you know, what was announced the other day by Rishi Sunak, which is going to keep very few people in work, which will see some businesses take government money and continue to make job losses, at the same time as universal, the top up that was given to universal benefit and tax credits has been now removed. It's very concerning that the voices from the top of the trade union movement simply echo, really, or seem to sort of suggest that that in itself is substantial enough strategy to tackle it, and in which the whole question of our climate crisis seems to be absolutely absent from the conversation, from the demands, from the campaigning that is taking place. The climate crisis has continued absolutely unabated, with no serious or significant action being taken any place in the world to address that climate crisis. And there is money available. There is a money tree. But every time that money tree has been shaken, and it has been shaken regularly in the last few months, the money that's been shaken from that money tree has gone straight into the coffers of the exact same big businesses that have benefited from the last few years of austerity and government spending and all the rest of it. The contracts have been handed to private companies who have been seen to fail over and over again, are failing now, and whose own workers and terms and conditions are some of the worst in the country. Serco jumps to mind as somebody who seems to just have a payroll from the government. So we've got some, we do have some serious work to do. It's absolutely fantastic to have Tanis on the call here today. Organisations like Leeds TUC doing some absolutely excellent work modelling what actually could be happening. But I'd like to raise this argument. There should be absolutely nobody losing their job at this moment in time. The money is there to take every single unemployed person and employ them in a national climate service and begin the process of investing in the kind of jobs that can tackle the climate crisis, investing in the kind of training that can put people into meaningfully and socially useful work. Every single unemployed person can be employed at this moment in time. The subsidies should be directed to a national climate service that can create those jobs and make the huge changes that we need. Investing in the energy that we need, in reducing energy use through insulation, in tackling waste, in repairing rather than reusing and throwing things away, in expanding our green spaces, in reconnecting us with nature, in repairing our relationship with nature, investing in local sustainable food production, investing in the low carbon jobs of care, education and health. And it really isn't good enough that those voices at the top of the trade union movement and in the labour movement are really almost quiet, you know, best quiet, at worst quiet on these absolutely central issues at this absolutely crucial time. And I would like to put a call out to all of us to raise that banner and begin that campaigning work with absolute vigor in the here and now, as indeed we're seeing in places like what is happening in Leeds, Glasgow at the moment. Trades Council have got a call for a free public transport system, but also to raise up those big strategic demands on our own movement, that this is at the centre of our campaigning in the next few months, and culminates in some serious demands being made as we demonstrate at COP26. Thanks, Steve.
Unmute. Yes, thank you very much, Suzanne. Next, I'm going to ask Sam Mason to speak. Sam, are you ready? Are you?
Yep, good to go.
Okay, very good. Off you go.
Great, thanks, Steve, and thanks, Suzanne, for putting that overview, because I think that's really important and a good place for me to jump off from, because I think obviously Suzanne's absolutely right. I think that the whole problem with the discussion that we're having at the moment, on one level, quite rightly, to obviously protect current workers and what we need to safeguard workers in this crisis, but we're not building the alternative and the narrative that we need around dealing with not just the crisis of climate change, but in the multiple crises that we're facing at the moment. Obviously, we're in a health crisis, we're in a financial crisis, we're in an economic crisis, we're in a social crisis, and these things all pre-existed before COVID, but we've now been turbocharged into this reality, sadly, and we're trying to respond to it with the same trade union strategies in a kind of reactive way, without thinking about where we are. And I think it shows to the failure of the work that we've done so far on our current strategies, and particularly around just transition, which is an area which I'm going to focus on mainly in my presentation. And I think it's useful to step back, because just transition is becoming a buzzword, you know, since it became included in the Paris Climate Agreement. Everybody chucks those two words into every paragraph now and think that kind of covers everything. The NGOs do it, we do it in the trade unions, we've got lots of documents around it, but I think we kind of need to remember where it came from, and it has its history back in the US, and the Canadians will have a dispute about this, and I don't really care, because my understanding how I've come to the just transition debate is actually through Tony Mazzarchi, who worked for the Oil and Chemical and Atomic Workers Union, and he was a trade union leader in the US who actually coined this idea along with the environmentalists. So the history, when they started to realize that you couldn't carry on with environmental damage, so the chemical companies actually got bailouts as usual, but the workers weren't getting a bailout. So they had something what they called a super fund for workers. So over time, this has become what they called a just transition. But I think what's really important about that, because it wasn't just what we talk about as social protections. One of the things that Tony Mazzarchi called for was a workers and jobs guarantee to pay workers to do nothing. If if they should come out of those industries, and workers should be paid to do nothing, to retrain, or even to have leisure time. And that itself dates back to the Second World War, when people were being decommissioned out of the army, and Tony Mazzarchi himself was paid by the US government to retrain. He actually retrained as in dentistry. So it has a long history to it. And the reason why I've sort of come these days to reminding people about the history, because we've lost its working class value to what just transition means, and it's become a sort of byword for green capitalism. Richard Branson talks about a just transition. We know Richard Branson doesn't care about workers. He's anti-trade unions, and he's tried to break strikes in the US and elsewhere. So I think we have to make the just transition what we want it to mean, as working class, as labour activists, and not what the TUC have made it mean, because again, it gives no analysis to power and working class power and how we actually win these arguments. Now I have the privilege of sitting in TUC meetings where we discuss these issues with national officers in the energy unions. Now they think you can go on a plant by plant basis and negotiate a just transition agreement, which fundamentally is a redundancy agreement, because if you're sitting with the likes of EDF or BP, whoever, they're not negotiating with you in your workplace. They're negotiating in a closed office in secret, away from us all, where they've already made their plans, as we know. And this is exactly what we see happening right now in the whole energy transition, because when you have organizations like BP coming out and saying they're going to green themselves and be part of this just transition, of course they're not going to be. They want to make money. They've got a profit motive. So we have to change and re-understand a just transition for what it means for us. So one of the things we argue for the first place in PCS, that the just transition is not about an energy transition solely. Of course, the energy transition is important, but we get too tied up thinking about fossil fuels and renewables. What we need to think about is a zero carbon economy that we need so desperately to address all of these multiple crises, not just the climate crisis or the environmental crisis. But there's no point for us in having a just transition that just creates a new green capitalism. This whole word around the green economy, what does that really mean? What is the green economy? It's a new economy for the capitalists to make money out of the energy transition, and that's what we're really looking at. So if we don't turn it on its head and start to look at it in a different way, and who are these jobs for? In our current narrative of just transition, we don't talk about women, we don't talk about disabled people in that, we don't talk about people of color in that, we don't talk about unorganized labor, we don't talk about people who are not even yet in the workforce. So we talk about a very narrow group of workers who generally are depicted as high skilled, invaluable jobs that we must protect. And we need to push outside of that framing, because whilst those workers of course are very, very important, and all workers are important, they need protections, and we need to make sure everybody has social protections. If we're going to look at the new economy we want, we have to think of every worker in every sector across the whole of the economy. And it's really interesting that pre-COVID, many of us were arguing that of course the care sector is a huge part of that whole just transition. And so for us, what we need is a very pro-public response to the current COVID crisis. And this is something that we're having discussions around nationally, internationally, as well as nationally, and start to re-look at what do we mean by our public services. And so one example we have in PCS, for example, the aviation sector, which has clearly been hugely impacted by the COVID crisis, and it's certainly not going to be bouncing back. The industry know it's not going to be bouncing back, and the only places in the aviation sector at the moment that are making money are those that have transitioned quite quickly, like Air Emirates, to freight, so flying more things around the world. But what we've argued for at PCS, and we have members in the aviation sector, is that we need to start seeing aviation as a public service, as part of a wider transport strategy, and not looked at something where you have transport and you have aviation, and look at why you why you fly. We're not saying people shouldn't fly at all, but if we want to deal with it in terms of the climate crisis, if we want to deal with it in terms of the job losses in the industry, and it is already a terrible industry to work in, British Airways have done exactly what they've been trying to do for a number of years in sacking lots of workers and changing terms and conditions. This has already been happening at Heathrow Airport before the crisis. So a lot of these employers are coming in to use the crisis to do the things that they've already been trying to achieve beforehand, and our government's been helping pay them to do that through the furlough money. A lot of the people in that sector have been on furlough and are now looking at redundancy in the coming months. But we say, bizarrely, we have got a little bit of agreement on this across the unions, because the money that's being paid for furlough, what we said is those workers should be retrained. Let's not lose those workers. We know what happened in the 80s and 90s. Lots of people lost their jobs, high unemployment, go out of the labour force. And we're saying, if you're paying for these workers, well, let's pay for them to start retraining into the jobs that do need doing. There's lots of work, there's lots of jobs that need doing. But this comes to our other problem, because we don't have agreement about what all that work is. I think many of us here will have agreement about what that work is, but not in the trade union movement. So if you sit in the meetings of the TUC, that work will be in carbon capture and storage. That work will be in blue hydrogen, so natural gas hydrogen, which Tanis will no doubt come on to and talk about a bit. That work is in nuclear energy. Some of you here may support that. We certainly don't. So we've already got a problem in that, because if we're going to have this transition, where are we transitioning to if we cannot agree what that end point is, so to speak? But I think this comes back to, I know you were hoping to have somebody come and speak from the Lucas plan today, but I'm actually part of the new Lucas plan project anyway, and it's great that I think you're probably going to do a sort of fuller meeting on the whole Lucas plan ideas. But I think this is very much the kind of thinking from the Lucas aerospace workers from the 1970s, who came up with their alternative corporate plan and actually use workers' knowledge and skills to look at what they could do for socially useful work, socially useful production. And I think these days we say obviously ecologically useful as well. And whilst obviously things have changed and we don't have the big manufacturing plants and production lines as before, clearly this is work that we need to be doing. In Scotland, they're giving contracts to the Chinese to build wind turbine sheaths, and we're going to be bringing those in on boats into Scotland to for the offshore wind farms when there's factories sitting empty in Scotland. And it's not a question of British jobs or British workers, but this is about the Chinese building what they need and us developing our own manufacturing capability as well. So what we should be doing is, obviously, I entirely agree with Suzanne, is reviewing our own strategies, not just in the trade unions, but across the labour movement, looking at a new form of unionism, which is very much what the Lucas Aerospace workers was about. It's often not touched upon in their story, but the way in which they organised across unions, across the skilled and unskilled labour from the shop floor, I think was a model we certainly have to revisit and learn from and learn more about as well. And I think we also need to look at having local strategies and local economic plans and diversification within our economies and the work that's needed there. And again, these are not necessarily new ideas. Again, some of you may remember the Greater London Council, going back to the days when John McDonnell was there. They set up a London-wide industrial strategy with forms of workers' control and looking into those kind of initiatives. Of course, that was all then shut down by the Thatcher government. But these are not new things, and these are certainly things we should be revisiting. So I think I'll just leave it on that note. Thanks.
Thank you, Sam. Right, okay, so that was very good. So now I'd like to introduce Tanis Belsham-Ray from Leeds TUC. If you would like to unmute yourself, Tanis, and speak.
Yeah, first I just wanted to sort of say thank you for the invitation to speak tonight. I think it's really important as trade councils, we do sort of link up with what we're doing to build a strategy forward. So as it's sort of already been mentioned, you know, we are in a climate emergency, and where this initially started was sort of back at beginning of last year, really. We saw the youth take a lot of action on that, and obviously there was a report produced which sort of advised we only had 12 years left before climate change becomes irreversible. So on the back of that, we decided to sort of last October, we held a conference in Leeds, which was a bit more general on what trade unions can do to combat a climate emergency. And sort of continuing from that, we've been a little bit halted with coronavirus, but obviously we've this year we've sort of continued to have webinars on several areas. One of the areas we sort of identified as there being very little really in the trade union movement about was the issue of retrofitting. That's the idea. Well, the idea really of putting sort of adapting homes, obviously, so they're more energy efficient, protecting. Just get the details, sorry, but sort of insulation sort of level, but it's a bit more than that. And I don't understand the full ins and outs of everything we works, and we've produced, as I say, we've got some experts on it who have sort of helped produce a document, but they've also done some webinars as well. So I'm just going to link it in the chat here if people do want to, and you can actually access some of our videos from the conference as well on that issue. But let me just get there we are. So what we're sort of wanting to do is launch a campaign for a huge investment in home retrofitting, so people's houses, so to have high standards of insulation with space and water heating, and looking at, as I say, the heat pumps, which is sort of and moving to a sort of renewably produced using electricity instead of gas. Now we're calling for this scheme locally, should be coordinated by Leeds City Council, but in partnership with sort of the unions, practitioners, community groups and local training providers. So we've got like Leeds City College of Building, but there's also, as I say, in your own town, I've not had a look what's in Medway, but the thing is there's colleges sort of specialise in that across the whole country. We're also calling for union members and job seekers to demand the training and retraining necessary to equip them for this new sustainable economy that we must build, with the plan for investment and policies needed to get workers employed where they're needed. And this links very much with the trust transition, because in retrofitting, but also in sustainable building, transport, and looking at sort of renewable energies and green projects. So we've sort of put together that sort of model. Now, the reason why I think retrofitting, you know, is one of the things we're campaigning on, is it's not just about the environment, but it's to do with improving the lives of working class people. So reduction in energy requirement, you know, having to spend less to heat your house effectively means a huge reduction in bills. So according to the latest estimates, we've worked out it's about 13.5% of Leeds residents lives in homes that are hard to heat due to sort of the structural features, and they're unable to pay this without cutting back on essential food and items. Actually, if you look at on a national basis, this is actually even worse in terms of that. I think something around the region of it's like nearly a quarter of the population have been struggling with their bills this year, particularly with the working from home. Actually, a lot more people are spending more time in the house, and bills are just skyrocketing, and this is one thing that could be done to help address that. It causes obviously significant financial stress on most sort of low to middling incomes. Not only that, you've got the health issues linked with cold homes, including obviously higher incidence of respiratory and cardiovascular illness, which is significantly greater, obviously, created an increase of anxiety and depression in adults and children, huge high levels of asthma, respiratory infections, and lower physical and cognitive development in children. There's been a bit of research on that, but you know, in East Leeds, where we're based, it is one of the highest areas in the country, actually, in terms of asthma among young children. And part of it is linked to the quality of the homes and mould and all sorts, which is hard to, you know, if people haven't seen some of the homes people are living in, it's immoral, really. So, you know, this links in with the idea of, you know, providing jobs. So, you know, we're really glad that, you know, the national and regional TUC is highlighting the issue with unemployment with the coronavirus, and obviously it's potentially sort of about 775,000 workers who've needed support from government for the job retention scheme, or self-employed people, as well as new people coming to the labour markets, where their sectors have been hit by the downturn in the economy. This has been particularly for young workers. So in Yorkshire, obviously it's about 18% of all young workers across Yorkshire are very likely to face unemployment in the next few months. I say that obviously we've got relatively few workers. I mean, we've got one or two trade union branches from the energy industry affiliate to our trades council, but really it's not. In Leeds, we're not exactly an industrial heavy city. So actually one thing that they can do is the retrofitting, because that doesn't, you know, we're not involved in energy production. This is, you know, training builders, technicians, plumbers, electricians, in order to bring the retrofitting scheme is an invaluable skill, which could actually, as I say, help with that unemployment level. That's fine. And, you know, so, but it's not just about calling for retrofitting. I'm not sure people seen the government have done a scheme on paying vouchers for people to do their homes and such. But we think this needs to be done in a sort of democratic way. So for ownership, so a MASH programme of retrofitting, not just individuals who so happen to have the money to do it. So with proper representation of workers and householders, it needs to be sort of coordinated with council, with unions, residents, community organisations, and the retrofit practitioners. And on of that, we call for the city, region, community organisations, obviously, to look at the installation of heat pumps as well, which I've not really had time to go into, but it's a huge step in terms of a pathway to, you know, the rapid sort of decarbonisation of the domestic sector. So training, job creation schemes, calling on the government for upfront investment in large-scale projects, which is implemented by the local authorities to bring down prices and actually create jobs for that. And as I say, we, as union members, we have a huge say in terms of the grassroots, in terms of pushing that through our branches, and calling for these policies to be adopted at the highest level in new unions, so we can start to shape the debate, as well as I say, forming alliances with community-based campaigns as well, which we have, as I say, links with two housing groups in Leeds from other disputes, which we're hoping to work with on that. Union members are also, as I say, we're household members, community members, so to stand, you know, together, not just on work, but for, you know, for socially useful and necessary work that will benefit, as I say, families and communities, both sort of now and in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dennis. So we've had lots of really good explanations and ideas, and now it's open for everyone else to ask questions, make comments, contributions. If you would raise your virtual hand, if you go to participants on the bottom of your screen, and you click on that, you'll see at the bottom it says you can raise your hand, your virtual hand. So if you would do that, and then and hopefully unmute yourself, or if not, we'll unmute you and ask your question. Right, and the first one, Steve Ballard.
Yeah, well done for having put this together, and well done for the two speakers for having kicked it off. But I think this, although the remarks I'm going to be making are based on my secretaryship of the London Hazard Centre, they're not necessarily reflective of all the trustees. For those of you who don't know the London Hazard Centre, it was set up by the GLC, the body that I think it was Sam mentioned, also set up. I'm afraid I should have written down what the body that she set up. They had a strategy team about jobs. They were at that stage, I would say, the GLC was the most forward-looking, the most enlightened collection of people who had some understanding of what was required to keep people to defend lives and livelihoods without prejudice, which is what we need. The trouble, what's happened since then, I would say, I mean, I know from the point of view of the London Hazard Centre, we just lost ground left, right, and centre by the fact that we were previously funded and now we're not. But so it has obliged me as being this I'm the secretary of this body, and the whole notion of protecting lives without prejudice is what scientific socialism was. That was what Marx and Engels are on about. I mean, I was raised on a farm, a pacifist farming community. So I've known, like all the 16-year-olds today, we cannot go on the way that we are. We have to share whatever nature has to offer us with all the other natural species. And that was what the notion of scientific enlightenment was supposed to have been about, which predates Marx. Marx said that the only agency that is capable of preventing humankind from destroying itself is the organized working class. And that's now not currently reflected in any of the bodies that exist if you can find a body that in the UK that actually puts that forward, I'll happily join it. But they're all, it's not about maintaining the economy. It never was about maintaining the economy. It's maintaining life on Earth, maintaining the conditions necessary for humankind to enjoy life on Earth until its natural end, which we all know it will come around. So I don't want to take up too much time on. And the awkwardness for the trade union and labour leaders at the moment is that they are following an agenda that's been set by somebody else. Nobody's putting out the working class agenda because, well, there isn't. Or rather, correct me if I'm wrong. If there is such a body, as I say, I'll go out and join it. But we, as both Sam and Suzanne, we've got a lot of work to do. But I would suggest that a lot of it is to do with how did we become alienated from the rest of nature? And as far as I was concerned, that was entrenched by religion. But in fact, it was begun by settled agriculture. I should have said settled agriculture, because it was at that point, unwittingly, humankind began to put its needs above the needs of the other intelligent species, and this has not been developed in the labour movement in a way that they can get hold of and repair the relationship. As I think it was Suzanne that put it that way. I can't remember if it was Suzanne or Sam, but it's that breakdown in humankind's relationship with the other species that needs to be repaired. And that's what Engels made it very clear, very, very clear when Kautsky was supporting colonial wars, in the cause of Germany. And then they were doing the same in France. The Second International was nothing like the First International. I beg your pardon, I've probably gone on too long. And thank you for your forbearance.
Thank you, Steve. I can't see any more virtual hands right at this moment. Bliss.
Thanks. Question to Tanis or indeed Sam and Suzanne as well. A fantastic campaign in Leeds, and also I think one of the very interesting things about it is that apart from being grassroots and talking about the really positive benefits, and we need to talk about abundance, not scarcity all the time, and not about protectionism, and about really proper transition, as Sam said, bringing everything in. One of the really positive things is how it's a kind of really good counter argument to the union, some of the unions pushing for hydrogen and so on. And so a kind of practical question to about organisation is, there is a Trades Council conference, which I've never really kind of worked out when it is all got onto that. And I just wondered if it's something that we should think about really taking forward the arguments too. And I know there's a potential friction between, say, organisations like the work that Leeds doing and maybe the larger Yorkshire TUC, where there is a lot of concentration on things that we maybe think are slightly false solutions, as well as some really good work as well, with really obviously trying to protect jobs in a carbon heavy area, but we need to be thinking much more widely. So yeah, the question is kind of, how do we take this through our trades councils, but as well as really much with the climate emergencies, which is the really important work that's going on actually grassroots and local.
Okay. Thanks, Bliss. I still can't see any more. Anyone else want to come up? Oh, must be me then. I mean, I think one of the important question is how we actually get the message across to people. How can we actually make it so that it's what we need is for the whole question about the need to create climate jobs to become common sense, and that is the big task that we actually have. That where it's, I mean, there's lots of talk about green jobs, but it's almost become a sort of, and of course green jobs, without any real sort of serious looking at what that really means. And I think this is, I mean, hopefully other people will be doing meetings like this as we go forward. But this is
Steve,
the task we have. Yeah.
Sorry, Steve.
Right.
Riz and Steve have got their hand up.
Jolly
Riz
good.
was first.
Yes, Rizwana, yeah.
Myself, yes. I was concerning about where do we go from here. Excellent excellent speakers, good points. I made notes of lots of things, but what is the way forward? The way I see it is that if we could look locally at what job losses we are having in our local area, which is Medway, then what retraining could these people possibly get? Because unless these people are retrained, there is really no way forward. And to me, that seems to be, in the short term, the most important thing we can actually agitate for. The longer we leave it, the less training, or they will just drop out. And once, as you know, you get out of the habit of work, it is very, very difficult to get back into work.
Thank you, Rizwana. Okay, Steve again.
Yeah, just to, Felice is absolutely right. I beg your pardon, I didn't catch the name of the last speaker. We have to, the whole question, the philosophical, I beg your pardon, I should get drawn into these language. The idea is to prevent every premature human death at every instance. And that's what the chair referred to, the common sense. That's what every human being, not only human being, but that's what every sentient being does, especially social sentient species. They look after their own. They don't allow any of them to die prematurely. They see off whoever needs to be seen off. Well, we're the only species who systematically slaughter our own. It's just, and that was what Marx, that was the alienation that Marx is on about. Marx and Engels, I mean, they didn't even make it up. They got the idea from somebody else who'd done it before. But their key thing was that the organized labor movement is the key work of labor is to continue the work of labor, continue the work of nature, which is to sustain life on earth until its natural end. I don't want to make, you can't over make these points, but when it comes to, and how does that work in practice in the local areas, it's defending jobs, in particular, it's defending lives. And sometimes you can't defend jobs, but then it's the government's business to defend lives. And there are some people now who are beyond working age. And what's this COVID crisis has really exposed is that the government has got no fucking plan at all to care for people who are beyond working age. They just fuck off and die is their policy for people in care homes. Again, I'm sorry, big butting in, but I'm getting towards that age myself where I'm not going to go quietly into that dark night.
Okay, Steve, thank you. Ralph?
Yeah. What depressed me about the statement from our worthy Chancellor was that there was seemed to be no mention at all about manufacturing. And it seems to me that one of the key things we would need is to develop our manufacturing to actually create a different type of society. And key example is transport. And what we're crying out for is a form of transport which does not depend on the private car. And we need the technology, I'm sure, is there with the controls. We can now have driverless cars and goodness knows what. But that needs to be developed. And in order to develop that kind of technology, we need two things at least. One, we need far more money put into research and development at the universities. And if you listen to what's happening to the universities and such like, and my own organisation, is the Institute of Mathematics and its Applications, complains bitterly about the lack of money going into investment in their field for mathematicians and scientists and technologists. And the other aspect is the question of apprenticeships. I grew up at the time, well, not when my son was an apprentice, and all his cousins, they were doing 5-year, 6-year, 7-year apprenticeships, learning the whole thing about their industry and such like. And it was a detailed involving practical work, educational work. And now when we talk about an apprenticeship, it's just 6 months, which is no time to actually learn a trade and learn how to really influence things or be useful. And I think that we need to really relook at the whole idea of what our manufacturing base is about and how we train people to work in that base and how we develop things. I think we're sadly lacking in all of these areas.
Thank you, Ralph. I can't see anybody else at the moment. Anybody else? Jeff? Jeff?
And others, that a large percentage of the people see a problem. But from seeing a problem, saying, isn't it terrible, to actually being motivated to take action and do things is a huge gap. The and people in trade unions need to be convinced, I mean, motivated. And then it's about power relationships in society. How do we persuade or force those in control of society to do something concrete? Better kick them out of the way. But unfortunately, it's seen as a problem, but as usual, getting people to actually do something is our huge problem. And obviously, meetings like this are a start. The organised working class has power, but it's an unused weapon most of the time. But great oak trees come from small acorns and all that, but it's motivating people is a huge problem.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Is anybody else? Steve again.
Thanks for that, Chair. Just picking up on Jeff's remarks, let's not lose sight of the fact that young people, school kids are not much, you know, 16-year-olds, 16 to 26. I mean, I'm just picking some figures from it, you know, they are getting their hind legs. They are saying this, you know, they are saying the system, the world's got to change. They are saying there is no planet B. They are on the same page as us. In fact, they're on the next page than us. We're on the page behind them. So I don't think was it you that just says that it's an opportunity? We've got to get this. We can get this right. We've got to get it right. Otherwise, we're all going to fry. So I don't think. I think we need to be properly frightened of the prospect of our premature extinction. But it's only arisen because, well, the fucking intelligentsia said, well, we know better than you lot. Well, they never did. They've always just looked after, you know, from the word dot, they've only looked after themselves. The universities have never, and the trouble is, what happened in the Soviet Union and China, it's still the same. They don't regard as the working class as the saviors, not saviors, that's the wrong word, as the only people that can carry humankind forward. So we've got lots of scope. There's loads of things we can be doing. We should, you're right, we should not be downhearted. But it's along these, there is a, they give kids now, sorry, kids, I shouldn't be calling them kids. If you get a PhD, you're no longer a kid. But they give them a doctorate of philosophy without being told the first thing about philosophy. And the first thing about philosophy is if you can't defend your own without prejudice, you're prejudicing all life on earth. I've gone on too long again.
Yeah. Ralph?
I think one of the major problems is that our youngsters do think very seriously about nature society and the way that the way the society is going and the way the society is structured. The problem is that they feel, and quite rightly in my mind, that they're not listened to. And a lot more working class children now go to university and such like. And they still retain their old attitudes of working class attitudes. They still remember where they came from. But the big cry I hear from young people nowadays is that no one listens to them. And yet they've led the way, certainly on climate change, they've led the way in actually challenging it and tackling it. So I think we need to give far more encouragement to young people and listen far more to them.
Unless there is anybody who hasn't yet spoken who wants to speak, I think I'm going to call all the speakers back in reverse order. Okay, Tanis, do you want to come back on some of those things?
Yeah, I'll come back on a few things. Just a Karl Marx quote here, which I think everyone should know, which is the philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways, but the point, however, is to change it. And it's one of the first quotes I ever heard, and since then I've but that's sort of the whole point of it, and the reason of putting this strategy forward in terms of the comments on the youth, you know, we've gone to the climate strikes, you know, we've spoken to them. The youth are the next trade unionists of the, you know, future, and it's quite disappointing. Until this year, I was the youngest Trades Council secretary in the country, and you know, fortunately I've been overtaken now as someone younger than me that's joined, but you know, that there is a disparity between, I think there's a lot of young people that are very active on the environment. Climate strikes are really desperately wanting to do stuff, but at the same time, that sort of lesson of the real way to implement change is through the trade union movement, but then they're not seeing it. So part of the reason to get them involved is to start winning campaigns, to start campaigning, start bringing it, and that sort of answers my question on, you know, someone asked about, you know, the issue on hydrogen and how do we get it into the, you know, the main agenda of the trades councils, because, you know, although hydrogen is, you know, when I studied it, you know, 10 years ago over in Iceland when they were looking at that, you know, that was seen as getting on the outdated side then, and we're talking 10 years later, 15 years later, it's now still the strategy. Actually, no, technology has developed to the point that solar panels can work off the sunlight of the moon. So why are we still looking at that sort of level? And, you know, it's a big issue is education. I've been to the National Trades Council conference, and obviously we have with Wakefield Trades Council, another Yorkshire one who's really big on campaigning on those issues as well. They put forward a motion on just transition, which was adopted by them. However, at the same time, Trades Council's bodies aren't necessarily the ones that have influence over the TUC. They can only actually send one motion to the National TUC conference, and that motion is, although we'll battle, and I urge if come next year, if you can get one and you know, support us with trying to get that as one of the main demands. It is the motion to go forward. It is only one, so that's links with our second thing, which is getting it from in the unions, from the grassroots up. So I'm in Unite, so you know, the idea is to get it to our Unite conference, put it into your local things, and that's the point of a trades council really, is to send that model. So we've got a model motion. We urge people to sort of look, adapt it to home areas, look at what colleges they are. As I say, we, you know, we've got we were really lucky in Leeds. We've got, you know, there's a group in there's a thing in Otley, Leeds University, and Leeds College of Building all have experts on retrofitting. But the thing is they've had to battle really, really hard to get funding for doing 10 houses as an experiment, and obviously the cost of that is astronomical because to retrofit those houses, because it's not done on a mass-produced scale, which is where the role of the working class and the trade unionists come in terms of taking over and changing the modes of production. If we look how quickly, you know, printer companies could change their systems to produce hand sanitizers, the way clothing companies to so quickly produce face masks when it was profitable for them to do so. Imagine if that was done as an actual democratically planned basis. And, you know, trade unions, if people haven't seen about Lucas Plan, please do, it's fantastic. But even more recently, the Harlem Wolf strike in Northern Ireland as well started to touch on those issues. And I think that's what we need to do, is keep an eye out for when these disputes happen and build on it, but also build that grassroots layer at the same time in every single, you know, because if we can get Unite, if we can get GMB, if we can get Unison to adopt these measures, it's not just about, you know, that would be enough really to convince the whole of the TUC as well. I think that's most of the questions answered now, but feel free to, I'll drop my email on here, but feel free to contact us.
Thank you very much, Tanis. Very, very helpful. Right, okay, Sam, we'll come back.
Yeah, thanks. A couple of things. I mean, I think on what's to be done, I mean, I think really the example from Leeds Trades Council has been really brilliant. It's one of the things I've been most excited about for a long time. but partly because of the process that Leeds Trades Council went through with the first sort of conference last October, and then these very detailed meetings, one of which I was part of over the summer, and really drilling down into the issues, which we quite often don't do, and drilling down into the technology, because hydrogen's been a really interesting one. I mean, obviously it's significant in Leeds, but I know, for example, Unison supports hydrogen, but you know, a lot are quite uneasy about it in Unison because they feel instinctively they should oppose it, but don't feel confident in reasons why. So I think, you know, the Leeds initiative has really helped with that. So I think we're all enthusiastic to take that forward, and certainly in PCS as well. So, but and I think the other thing is just, and it's something, I mean, I'm a member of the Waltham Forest Trades Council, and I think it probably demographically is quite similar to a lot of trades councils as well. And also the people involved are very heavily politically involved in lots of other things. So as ever, it's always the same groups of us doing the same things. But I think we shouldn't underestimate the sort of power of Trades Council to organise, and the need to really build them up. And you know, the Lucas plan, so the motion that went to TUC Congress in 2017 on defence diversification, which got through, you know, came from Derby Trades Council, which was absolutely brilliant. I mean, it's not gone much further in the TUC, but at least it's given us a basis to properly have that discussion. And I think that's one of the real tragedies about it, because what we have seen through this pandemic is obviously government does have money. Government can do things when it wants to do things, clearly in their own interest, not our collective interests. But they did repurpose manufacturing lines. So one of the Airbus factories down at Broughton in North Wales was repurposed in conjunction with Unite Union, was very instrumental in actually enabling some of this to manufacture ventilators as part of the UK ventilator challenge. Now that's one of the factories which is now facing mass layoffs, and you know, it's just like, it's just crying out, why was Unite not taking this strategy further? It did this at the start of the pandemic and saying this is what needed to happen, and not see it through to this is what transition looks like and what we should be arguing for. Now it's interesting that there's one or two voices around the rank and file that are calling for this, who are actually working in supply chains across the aerospace sector, but that's just individuals who are not connected up. So the more we can have these conversations, the better. And of course that all links into retraining and skilling, and the whole point about apprenticeships is so important, because again, it's retrofit and installation conservation works in somewhere like Germany. That's a 5-year apprentice program and seen as highly skilled paid work. In this country, as we know, private property developers, and particularly in places like London, but I'm sure it's happening around Medway towns as well, tend to use apprenticeship as cheap labour, and we know that they don't really get skilled, and particularly not into the whole trades of the building industry and construction work, and across zero carbon homes and all the technology that goes with it. So one of the other things we'd argue for, and I think this is in the Leeds campaign, is bringing back in-house, you know, even looking at nationalised construction sector and direct labour organisations. And so that's when we're talking about this sort of pro-public response, is really looking very differently about how we see our public services and understand them as well. Is obviously for a trade union like PCS, we deal with the social security system and fighting against universal credit, but I think we have to widen our perspective as the new welfare architecture that we need for workers. And again, it's part of the underpinning of the just transition approach as a transformative vision to understanding welfare within everything that supports people within society and the fabric of society, whether it's care sector, whether it's educators, and all those other functions that happen that enable people to not just do their jobs but go about their daily lives. So it's not just about the jobs, and of course young people are absolutely key. You know, it's been fantastic in some unions like the NEU that have really pulled in lots of members around the back of the COVID crisis, but obviously we need to engage those members within the wider discussions that we're having. And I know in PCS, I mean, we certainly can attract new members on the back of our agenda of climate change and work that we're doing around there. And we need to use that more, particularly in reaching out to younger people. And I wholly support that we need a new manufacturing industry. I think it's very telling, 80% of our economy is around the service sector. We know that was a very deliberate policies under the Thatcherite era. And that's why we've got huge swathes of very precarious work, underemployment, even pre-COVID. So these are all multiple issues that we have to address in the round. It's a huge task, but one thing is that we clearly need the national coordination to doing that. We're not going to get it under this government, and I think we're banging our heads against brick walls, and we can say we deserve this and all the rest of it. We know this government's not going to do it unless it's looking after their own. But I think that's where we have to start developing our own local strategies and see what we can do, at least in the short term at a local level, but building up that confidence and knowledge and experience. So in the Medway towns is looking at what are the opportunities in your own area for things, and again, which is why the Leeds project is so good, because we can all take that and look at it in our local situations and build out from that. So I think I'll just finish on that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sam. Before I call in Suzanne, Suzanne, as I said at the beginning, is chair of the Campaign Against Climate Change Trade Union Group and the Campaign Against Climate Change. Midway Trades Council are affiliated to the Campaign Against Climate Change, and I would urge all trade councils and trade union branches to do the same. There is, I've put a link in the chat for the 1 million climate jobs campaign that the Campaign Against Climate Change Trade Union Group actually produced quite a few years ago, and have updated it, and we're going to update it again. And I would urge people to look at that. There's lots and lots of useful information, and also to affiliate with the Campaign Against Climate Change. Suzanne.
Great, and thanks for that, Steve. Very much echo your comments there. The frustration that people feel is real and palpable, and reflects the gap between the huge urgency of the situation that we're in on every level, as people have talked about, and the sense that the mobilization for change doesn't match up to that urgency and that desire for change. I would say this, though, a couple of things. One is that a number of people mentioned it. This time last year, pretty much this time last year, the 20th of September, saw a huge global climate strike, actually, and then actually a weeks-long global climate strike, starting on the 20th of September, finishing on the 27th of September, in which millions of people, led by young people, took to the streets, walked out of workplaces to demand the urgent action that we need on climate. I think the movement was taken off the streets by the COVID crisis, but the ideas of that movement remain very deep within society. And it's interesting, the last few weeks, at the beginning of the COVID crisis, there was a survey done. Only 6% of people want to return to the economy that they knew before the beginning of the COVID crisis. There were two brilliant examples recently, the cross-party public consultation that was done, in which across all age groups and across a whole number of different demographics, actually people were asking for, demanding, looking for a real transformation of the economy, green economy, different relationship with nature, different setup basically in our working and our social lives. Earlier on, there was the results of the Citizens' Assembly, the Climate Assembly, which came up with very similar ideas of the kind of transformations that people are looking for in society. And that is very, very, very deep there. I think we have to take, as people have said, the movement into the trade union movement. I think that we also have to call out the leadership of the trade union movement. So I think we have to, we have to take emotions and win the layers of people who already won, if you like, to this vision of a social transformation of the type that we've been speaking about. But we have to call out our trade union leaders on this. It's just not acceptable that in this moment of crisis, in this possibility of fighting for and necessity of fighting for a transformation, that the voices of the leadership of the trade union movement are muted, fall behind the agenda of the government on in a way which simply does replicate the call for business as usual that people have spoken about. I think that, and we have to think about the initiatives that we can take to articulate that. At our last meeting of Campaign Against Climate Change Trade Union Group, we spoke about the idea, and I hope this is something that we can work up quite quickly and get the message out there. We spoke about, for example, calling local protests to coincide with the end of furlough, and to have those local protests raise up the kind of campaigns that are taking place, for example, in Leeds and Glasgow, but also to identify, where the job losses are in the local community and what jobs could be created, so that those people are not without employment and are contributing to the transformation that we need in a society. One of our contributors on that call from Manchester spoke about how a whole number of job losses at Debenhams, and a number of the workers who were losing their jobs at Debenham actually speaking about, they didn't dislike their work, but they were very much thinking about the possibilities of other kinds of work, which would give, we saw more socially, have more social impact than the work that they were doing at this moment in time. So I can see us organising some very good protests outside of workplaces that have closed down, and where could those jobs transition to for the real just transformation that we need in society. I want to finish up on a couple of things. A lot of people have spoken about the local plans, and I think they would be, and they are great initiatives. I know a couple of years ago, SAM, PCS, Campaign Against Climate Change worked together to produce a plan to challenge the idea that fracking would be able to provide the employment needed in Blackpool area, very high unemployment, and tried to map out the kind of jobs that could be created in that area, along the kind of climate jobs model around the Green New Deal model. I think the more of that we do is better, but we do have to build up a social base to deliver those demands. So the final thing I want to say is about COP26. That's not to delay the campaigning that we need to do now, but I think it is to think that as we campaign and bring together forces, whether that's across trades councils, within unions, across unions, linking movements and unions together, etc., I think we should be thinking about how that looks, and the demands that it raises up, and the sheer social weight that we're trying to build by the time that we get to the mobilization for COP26. And I think that we have to look to really having at the heart of that mobilization that demand for a just transformation of society, and with working class people really at the heart of that demand and of that mobilization. And I think if we can set our sights on that, then actually the ability to fight for some of the things we're talking about will be much enhanced. Thanks, Steve.
Right. Thank you very much, Suzanne. Thank you to all our speakers, and thank you to everybody else who came along. We've got a lot of work to do. Certainly Midway Trades Council, we're meeting on Wednesday. I'm sure we're going to be discussing quite a lot of this, and I'm sure for everybody else, take it to your union branch, take it to your trades council, and wherever else you can, because it's a big job and it's one that definitely needs to be done. Everybody.
Well
Thank
done.
you. Thank you, everyone.
Good night
And
now.
thanks, Steve, for
Thank you,
chairing
Steve.
this evening.
Well done.
Thank you
Good
very
night.
much.
Thank you all.
Right.
Cheers,
See you.
everyone.
See you.
Good
Bye.
night.
Bye.
Yeah, bye.
Bye.